The airplane cabin was alive with the low hum of conversations, rolling suitcases, and the distant drone of engines preparing for takeoff. Passengers settled into their seats, some adjusting their headphones, others scrolling through phones or whispering to companions, all absorbed in the routine of travel. Among them, Cynthia cradled her newborn son, rocking him gently to soothe his occasional whimpers. She had flown many times before, but the weight of responsibility pressed heavier than usual today. Every movement, every sound, every glance mattered when holding a fragile life. As the flight attendants passed through the aisles checking seats, one of them, a woman with a sharp expression and a rigid posture, approached Cynthia. At first, Cynthia smiled politely, hoping for assistance, but the attendant's gaze lingered on her with an unmistakable air of judgment. "You need to move aside," the attendant barked, her tone carrying authority disguised as professionalism, but with an unmistakable undercurrent of impatience. Cynthia responded calmly, explaining she simply needed help securing the baby and requested a small blanket. The response was immediate, almost instinctual, an impulsive, unprovoked slap to her shoulder. The contact was light but deliberate, shocking in its disrespect. The cabin went silent for a heartbeat, passengers exchanging stunned glances. Some leaned forward, unsure whether to intervene. Others whispered quietly, their eyes wide with disbelief. Cynthia froze, clutching her baby close, feeling a mix of fear, humiliation, and outrage surge through her. The baby's small cries echoed faintly, adding urgency to the moment, emphasizing the vulnerability of the mother and child. Meanwhile, across the aisle, her husband, David, sat in his seat, his posture calm, hands folded on his lap, observing the incident with measured attention. He had built his life on precision, attention to detail, and understanding the nuances of power. To the untrained eye, he was just another passenger, perhaps absorbed in work or travel plans, but in reality, he was the owner of the airline itself. Every misstep, every unprofessional action by the crew was being catalogued in his mind. He watched the flight attendant's arrogance, the smirk she wore as she assumed dominance over a young mother with a newborn, and he felt a quiet storm gathering within. David's mind raced, weighing the right moment to intervene, the proper protocol to enforce accountability without creating chaos mid-flight. Yet, even as passengers shifted in their seats, some whispering among themselves, the calmness in David's demeanor radiated authority. It was the stillness before the storm, a promise that the injustice occurring in front of him would not go unanswered. He did not need to shout or make a scene. His presence alone, patient and observing, carried the weight of ownership and ultimate control. The flight attendant, unaware of the true nature of the man she had just provoked, continued her duties, glancing at Cynthia with an expression that combined impatience and condescension, certain that the situation was under her command. But she could not yet see that her arrogance had placed her directly in the path of someone who would not tolerate disrespect, and that in mere minutes her assumptions about power, privilege, and authority would be shattered in front of the entire cabin. David waited patiently as the flight attendant returned to her duties, his eyes never leaving her, analyzing every movement, every twitch of her expression. The cabin, still humming with the low background noise of engines and murmured conversations, seemed to tighten around the tension he projected, though most passengers were unaware of the true gravity of the moment. He did not need to rise immediately. Authority in its purest form required no theatrics. When she once again approached the aisle near his family, he stood slowly, deliberately, ensuring that all eyes in the immediate area were drawn to him. His presence shifted the energy in the cabin, the casual chatter dulled, and an almost imperceptible hush fell over nearby passengers. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm, smooth, and unyielding, carrying effortlessly through the cabin. "You just slapped my wife while she was holding our child." The words, simple yet imbued with the weight of ownership and command, struck the attendant like a physical blow. Her face froze, a flicker of disbelief crossing her features as she opened her mouth, attempting to respond, but no sound came. David's gaze was steady, unwavering, radiating authority in a way that silenced the murmurs and whispered judgments of passengers. "I am the owner of this airline," he continued, his tone still composed yet unrelenting. "Every passenger, every crew member, every interaction that occurs on one of my planes reflects on the standards I uphold. What you just did was unacceptable. You are not here to belittle, intimidate, or disrespect anyone, and especially not a mother with a newborn." The cabin staff, sensing the intensity of the moment, began shifting uneasily, realizing that the man standing before them was not merely a passenger voicing a complaint, but someone whose word carried immediate consequence. The manager on duty, who had been trying to maintain order and maintain a semblance of authority over the crew, froze when he noticed David's calm, yet commanding stance. David took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving the flight attendant, who now looked pale and rigid with panic. "There will be no excuses," he said firmly, projecting a quiet ferocity that filled the aisle. "Your actions violated every principle of professionalism, decency, and respect that this airline represents. Consider this a final warning, but know this: anyone who treats passengers with such contempt has no place on my aircraft or in my company ever again." The passengers, now fully aware of the unfolding confrontation, leaned forward in their seats, some holding their breath, others whispering in admiration at the composure and authority displayed by David. The flight attendant stammered, searching for words that would never come, while the rest of the cabin watched, riveted by the drama and the sudden reversal of perceived power. David's intervention was surgical, precise, and absolute, signaling to everyone present that arrogance, cruelty, or disrespect would not be tolerated, not in his presence, and certainly not under his command. He then turned briefly to his wife, giving her a calm, reassuring smile, silently conveying that she and their child were safe, and that justice would be swift and inevitable. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted palpably. Tension gave way to anticipation, as both crew and passengers understood that the unfolding events would leave an indelible mark on everyone witnessing them. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity for the flight attendant as the passengers watched the scene unfold, their whispers creating a low, anticipatory hum across the cabin. David, composed yet firm, had already contacted the airline's operations team and HR department while keeping his focus on ensuring Cynthia and their newborn remained calm and secure. The staff moved nervously, whispering among themselves, unsure of what would happen next now that the airline owner had directly confronted one of their colleagues. The attendant, realizing the magnitude of her mistake, looked around desperately, her earlier arrogance replaced by pale, shaky panic. She had assumed authority over a passenger, never considering that her actions might provoke consequences so swift and uncompromising. David stood by, his posture calm but radiating absolute control, letting the weight of his silence speak as loudly as his previous words had. The cabin manager, who had been attempting to maintain a facade of control, now looked exposed and flustered, realizing that the chain of command had been bypassed and that the ultimate authority in the plane belonged to a man who had witnessed the entire incident firsthand. Soon, the operations team and HR staff arrived, briefed by David, and within moments, the flight attendant was formally informed that her actions were unacceptable and that her employment was terminated immediately. Passengers watched in astonishment, some clapping quietly, others nodding in agreement, while whispers of justice served and finally rippled through the cabin. David then turned to the cabin, his voice projecting calm authority, yet carrying every ounce of moral weight. "This airline values respect, dignity, and safety above all else," he said. "Anyone who fails to uphold these principles, anyone who disrespects passengers, their families, or the responsibilities entrusted to them, will face immediate consequences." The declaration drew murmurs of approval and relief from passengers who had been witnesses to the ordeal, and the atmosphere in the cabin shifted from tension to vindication. Cynthia, still holding her baby, looked at David with a mixture of awe, gratitude, and relief, realizing just how quickly the situation had turned in their favor. Her baby cooed softly, a small, innocent reminder of why this intervention mattered so deeply. David returned to his seat beside his family, Maintaining his calm demeanor as the flight attendant was escorted toward the rear of the plane, her head bowed, the weight of her actions reflected in every step. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, the story of the incident had already spread among passengers. They whispered about the courage, authority, and decisiveness of the man who had witnessed wrongdoing and acted immediately, and the grace, composure, and resilience of the mother who had been targeted. The lesson was clear. No passenger, regardless of who they are or what they hold, should ever endure disrespect, and those who violate trust and decency will be held accountable without delay. As the hum of engines filled the cabin once more, there was a sense of restoration, a quiet acknowledgement that justice had been served and dignity preserved, leaving everyone present with a lasting impression of courage, accountability, and the power of decisive leadership.